why do you think that most recipes on the internet, on YouTube, they tell you to like sear the meat first and then boil it? There is only one thing that will stop you from like using this method, but I'll get to it later. So keep in mind that when you're cooking, there is an heat source, okay, which can be fucking fire, an oven resistance, molten lava, anything that produces heat. And then there is the food, like the food item you're trying to cook. That can be meat. I will use meat in this example. So a heat interface is the thing that is between the food and the heat source. Usually, if you don't use anything, it's air. But if you're smart and you don't want to burn your food, you will use water or fat. These are like the main two heat interface. I mean, you can also use anything that has liquid, like a tomato sauce. I will talk about that later if you want. It's the same example if you think about it. If you ever build a PC, there is like the thermal paste, okay? That is the heat interface between the CPU, which gets really hot and you want to dissipate that heat, and then there is the heat sink, which is the, you know, the metal kind of strip things that you want like to dissipate the heat to. If you just put the heat dissipator on top of the CPU, the heat will not conduct really well, because there is a microscopical layer of air that is like isolating the two things. So you want to have a medium, a conduct, which links the two materials, and this is done by thermal paste. I don't think you can use thermal paste in cooking, but it will be like a great option because it is really, a really good conductor of heat. So why do you use a heat interface? It enables the heat to be transferred evenly, and yeah, it allows you to basically have a widespread temperature over your food, and it is very important for the Maillard reaction and things I will explain later. So if you think about it, if you don't like have water when you cook or fat when you cook, what will happen is that basically, like, to a microscopical level, you have a very flat surface, okay, which is the pan, and then you have the food, which is like not flat. It is very like bumpy, and it is just not flat, okay? So you will basically have a really cooked, really well cooked, almost charred, like burnt areas of your food, and you will have like quite a bit cooked but not really areas of your meat, for example. Well, if you boil, okay, if you use water, or even just a splash of water, like you can use like water as it was like a, you know, when you stir fry your food, like you put a drop of oil and you stir fry the vegetables maybe. You can do the same thing with water, because it is like an actual thermal interface. That maybe the oil is like a bit better in that case, because it like coats the whole food and makes for a better heat interface. So yeah, like water is great because you can like surround the food with a heat interface. If you fry, you usually, like, unless you're deep frying, you don't surround the food with a heat interface. While with boiling, you basically have a like a hot temperature around the food, like very evenly, and it is not limited to the bottom surface of the pan, which is like very flat and not very adhesive to the food. Frying, on the other hand, is like water, but hotter. You see, like, if you remember the science class you had in school, water reaches 100 degrees maximum in like a regular atmosphere pressure. So you cannot get water, like liquid water, hotter than 100 degrees. It will like turn into steam. So this is like one thing you have to keep in mind. You cannot get water hotter than 100 degrees. Like, there is no way. And it is actually useful if you're like trying, like, if you're like new to cooking, you're trying not to burn your food. Like, it's very hard to burn your food. Like, it is impossible, okay, to burn your food if you're boiling it, because it will not get hotter than 100 degrees. So that is great, right? That's wonderful. Well, actually no, okay? There is one downside. You know what doesn't happen at 100 degrees Celsius? The Maillard reaction. The Maillard reaction is basically the browning reaction, okay? And that occurs at around 140, 160 degrees Celsius. If you use Fahrenheit, I'm very sorry if you use Fahrenheit, it is very sad. If you fry things, you can get them hotter than 100 degrees, and you will get to the temperatures of the Maillard reaction so very, very easily. So yeah, it's true that you can also burn your food if you're frying, because it will get very hot, but you can also get the Maillard reaction. So if you just stay careful about the temperatures and the time, you will get the Maillard reaction that is very good. So after all of this, like, why is boiling good? I just like debunked boiling as it doesn't like have the Maillard reaction, which is like the fucking best thing you can have in your food. Well, for starters, if you're a beginner, it is very easy to set up. You don't even need like to do math. Like, it's not like the oven that you have like to set up the temperatures and the times, which I think is very useless, but it is like very easy to set up. Just put water into a pot and boil it. That's very easy. Second reason is that this is like by far the most forgiving method on time. As I said before, it is literally impossible to burn food if you're boiling. unless you evaporate all the water. But it is also true that the more you boil, usually the softer the meat will get. Okay, if you're cooking, for example, meat stew. And it is very useful because you have like to be very mindful of the cooking times, while you maybe have to be very mindful if you're like roasting things, you don't want to get them too dry. While with boiling, it is very easy, like the time is very forgiving. Third reason is that it gives a very like wonderful texture, like tender, soft, melt in your mouth texture. Okay, like almost any food, if you boil it enough, you will get a very soft food. And I personally love the texture. I don't know if that's only me, that's like my emotional section of food pleasure. Maybe like I have good memories about boiling, about the soft texture of boiling, so I really enjoy boiling. But I really like the texture, and I think everybody does. And you know, it's kind of makes sense if you think about it. Like we have always used boiling and you know, to cook food, so maybe like that's a hardwired things we have in us. But I mean, our ancestors used it very often, and even I, when I'm like doing survival, I think that's like the best cooking method you can use if you are like in a survival situation where you like don't want to waste any food. Why? So like it allows you to not waste any nutrients. If you like roast things, if you think about it, like the fat will drip, okay, and that is like calories. You're wasting calories. You don't want to waste calories if you're in a survival situation or you're like starving like our ancestors. So what you're gonna do is basically boil the food, so like all the nutrients, the fucking taurine, the fat, all the vitamins, all the minerals are gonna melt into the water, and then you can drink the water afterwards, which is also called broth, and I love broth. It's very nutritious. Yeah, and fourth benefit, you get a very delicious broth if you cook with if you boil things, regardless of what you're boiling. If you're boiling like vegetables, meat, or like vegetables and meat, which is a very good idea. There is like this umami thing that is happening if you mix vegetables and meat together. I will make a video on that if you want. But basically, you have a very good broth you can use in everything. So yeah, I think that boiling is great. But let's get back to frying for a moment, okay? So why is frying good? First of all, you can have the Maillard reaction with frying. And secondly, it is fat, okay? Just fat. And we like fat, as we should. So not only it gives the possibility to have the Maillard reaction, it also adds fattiness to the meal. And you want another secret right here. It's like this is like really strong of an advice. Why do you think that most recipes, okay, on the internet, on YouTube, they tell you to like sear the meat first and then boil it? Maybe if you search like a pot roast recipe, they will tell you to sear, which means to brown the meat first, okay, with fat, and then boil it, add broth, and you know, boil the thing. The reason is that if you do this, okay, if you first have the Maillard reaction happen and then you boil it, you will get the best out of both worlds, because you get the browning and the tenderness from boiling. And by the way, you can also do the opposite. You can also first boil it and then have the Maillard reaction. This is what happens when you do like French fries. The way you do French fries is basically boil the potatoes until they are soft, and then you fry them. That's easy, okay? First you boil, which gives them the really soft texture we are all after, and then you give it the crust, like the Maillard reaction crust. And you know, like when I see these recipes, like also when I was a kid, and my mom was like, Fede, help me like with the recipe, like can you read me the recipe, can you help me with the recipe? I was like, sure, yeah. So like I went there and read the recipe. They were like this precise step. I was like, what the fuck is that? Why do you have like to cook it first and then 30 minutes this and 30 minutes that? And to this day I don't believe like you have to be very mindful of timings. Only if you are doing like some really complicated and you want to like really be careful and you want the perfect recipe, you maybe want to be careful about temperatures. But if you're like a person, like normal human being cooking for yourself, you don't need that. Okay, that said, there was always these like strange rules, like sear the meat and then like boil it, and you know, I was confused before. Now I've understood why that is the case, and now I'm giving it to you. As you may see, like cooking can really be broken down in specific elements, and I like to break things down to the most rational things. And like once you understand them, you don't really need recipes. That's the thing. That's the great thing. You don't need recipes if you know the fundamentals, the pillars. I've explained the 5 pillars I think are the most important in my other videos, but if you just keep those in mind, and you maybe also look at the texture, but that will come later with time if you want like to really like be satisfied with what you eat. Like just like by keeping in mind those 5 principles and trying things for yourself, you will like develop a really good cooking skill set. You can basically like improvise any meal. Like when I say improvise, I mean like create a really good tasty dish in some place that you don't have like the right ingredients and the right cookware. You will develop this skill. Like you will develop the ability to cook anything and make it good. So I want to give you an example. So a few weeks ago I went to this like kind of restaurant bar. So it was like kind of like a construction worker kind of bar restaurant. Okay, you could go there and eat like for a very cheap and homemade meals. Okay, and there was this this piece of meat. I don't know the name in English. It's basically like a piece of meat with a bone and a hole in it. Okay, and that hole is like filled with I think it's like fat, maybe like it's maybe bone marrow, I don't know that. Basically like they brought us this dish. It was really good. It was really like this very soft, and it was covered with tomato sauce. Basically like they cooked it in tomato sauce and the juices of itself. This method is called in Italian is called in umido. I don't know if this is like a Tuscany traditional recipe or it is like an Italian traditional recipe. Either way, like this in umido means like in moist, like cooked in itself, in its own steam and in its own juices. And usually what you do is you add tomato sauce in it. Tomato sauce, why? You know, I've covered that many times, but tomato is like the OG ingredient. Okay, it has acidity, sweetness and umami, so you cannot go wrong with tomatoes. So I didn't know the recipe. Okay, this is like probably like a very traditional recipe you have to follow recipe for. Do you know what I did when I got back home? A few days later, I bought this exact piece of meat because it's actually like pretty good. I want to eat that more often now that I've discovered it. I took that, okay, I seared it a little bit, okay, to give it the umami crust. And then guess what? I took tomato sauce, dumped it into the pan and let it cook. No recipe. It's just like boil your meat in tomato sauce. That easy. I also added some dry tomatoes because the tomato sauce was a bit bland, so I wanted to add more sweetness and umami, but that's like a side thing. And yeah, like put some salt and you're good. You maybe need like 1 hour, 2 hours, I don't know, like you can like try to pinch the meat and you can like decide when it is soft enough. The more you cook it, the more soft it will get. This usually happens with like most kind of meats. Maybe not with liver. Liver is a bit like you have to be careful with the timings on liver because if you cook it too much, it will get hard. But you know, like most meats and muscles are fine to overcook. So like without even knowing the recipe, I was able to replicate this delicious recipe. And that's the skill I'm talking about. Like see something that you think is good and tastes good, and you can basically kind of replicate it because you understand that cooking can be broken down in elements and you don't have like to follow the specificest recipe. And I also made a video on that, and I'll add something which I didn't say in the video, which is that recipes are just a list of ingredients. Okay, like the list of ingredients is just like enough to give you the same taste if you like take the same ingredients and use them. And actually I'll tell you more. Usually like most of the ingredients you see, like the spices, are not that important. Like the main components are salt, the fat they use, and the vegetables they use, maybe also the piece of meat. And the goal of the instructions is just to tell you like to reach the same texture as they have. What I'm trying to say is that if you just take the same ingredients, like broadly the same ingredients like I did, like I took the same meat and the tomato sauce and I mixed them together, I got a really similar result. If you follow the recipe, you will maybe get the same texture and the same amount of Maillard reaction maybe, but the thing is that you don't really need those things. Like the 80-20 rules on this is that if you want like the 80% of the results, you just need to like use broadly the same ingredients, and you can also improvise the cooking time and temperatures. You don't really like need to be strict on the instructions. If you want like to achieve the full potential, also like the remaining 20%, yes, of course you can follow the recipe to the letter, but I honestly don't think that's worth it. Okay, that's just a big time waste. That's of course if you're cooking for yourself, you're just trying to eat healthy. If you're like cooking for a special occasion, you may as well like follow recipe. I also do that sometimes. And yeah, that is like why I think the boiling is like the best method, like very easy and you cannot go wrong with boiling. And yeah, that's it. Enjoy your broth.